you can share it if you want. It's already shared on the page of the foundations, of the foundations page on Facebook.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Just,
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, their scholars, their friends and colleagues, good afternoon, good evening. I am so happy today to introduce Dr. Walter Edward Young to present a new paper in this series of lectures organized by the Foundation of Research in Philosophy in Sciences in Muslim context. Before that, let me say some words on Walter Edward Young. Dr. Walter Edward Young is a postdoctoral researcher currently working with Professor Robert Wisnowski on the John Templeton Foundation project, Muhammad Abdu's super commentary on Ad-Dawani's commentary on Al-Iji's Creed, a new source for the renewal of Islamic analytical theology. With both an MA and a PhD in Islamic Studies from McGill University's Institute of Islamic Studies, he has held numerous postdoctoral research positions in the broader domain of Islamicate intellectual history. His research interests permeate several domains of Islamic thought, with particular concentration in pre-modern law, legal theory, logic, and dialectic. Walter Edward Young published many articles and papers, but his famous monograph is the dialectical forge. I mean, I do remember, published by Springer in early 2017. I am so happy that Walter Edward Young accepted my invitation to give that lecture on Prelude to a History of Naqḍ, Inconsistency and Untenable Entailment in Islamicate Dialectics. Thank you, Edward, for your acceptance, and please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Fuad, and thank you everyone for joining me in this exploration of a pivotal dialectical move over 1,000 years of its development. Of course, I would like to especially thank you, Fuad, in Rabat, for inviting me to participate in this year's Philosopher's academic lecture series, and for organizing everything, and for hosting and managing, and for the wonderful initiative that you're spearheading. Before we begin, an apology in advance. Much of the material in this lecture is quite technical, and if you don't have some knowledge of Islamic dialectics or legal theory, it may be a little difficult to follow. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do about it. Providing a proper background for this talk would require a lecture, or maybe even a series of lectures all of its own. But I will, however, briefly address three wider contexts. And one last thing, the original version of this lecture is about an hour and a half. So for the sake of time today, I will skip some sections. Please, should anyone wish a copy of the PowerPoint, which includes all the skipped parts, please send me an email and I will send you a PDF. So to begin, the dialectical objection of Naqḍ has enjoyed a consistent presence in Islamicate dialectical theory throughout its more than 1,200-year development. Naqḍ is a methodological staple, whether prescribed, reworked, or rejected. Its theory is found in every work of Jadal, Khilaf, Munazara, and Adab al-Beth, and its practice is commonplace in texts across numerous argumentative disciplines. In its broadest conception, Naqḍ is a family of reductios, denying an opponent's supporting argument because it entails an untenable consequence, whether an intradoctrinal inconsistency, the same argument elsewhere supporting an opposite conclusion, or an absurdity like infinite regress and the conjoining of contradictions or contradictories. So theories of Naqḍ were neither static nor simple. However, some dialecticians even declared Naqḍ with its attendant controversies and debates among the most prodigious and difficult problems in dialectical theory. As such, a book-length history of Naqḍ theory should tell us much about the evolution of Islamicate dialectics as a whole. Now, this study today constitutes a small first step in that larger endeavor, setting aside for the time being that great complex of arguments on the nature, validity, and application of Naqḍ. I have begun collecting Naqḍ relevant definitions and expository material spanning the length and breadth of dialectical theory in Islam. Now, failing a proper grounding, I can at least acknowledge three larger contexts and recommend some accessible readings. The first, of course, is Islamicate Dialectics itself. Very briefly, Islamicate theories of dialectic, developing mostly under the Arabic rubrics of Jadal, Khilaf, Munazara, and Adab al-Beth, promulgated rational methods and systematic procedures for scholarly disputation, that is, logics for debate. Muslim theorists and practitioners envisaged dialectic as a formal, dialogical, question and answer method of truth-seeking disputation, eschewing fallacy and prizing veracity over victory. Like Aristotle's dialectic, though very, very different in particulars, variant strains of Islamic dialectical theory aimed ultimately at testing and proving or destroying and supplanting a given solution to a given problem question or mas'ala. But most importantly, the majority of Muslim theorists understood dialectic as a method of sincere truth-seeking, neither aimed at winning arguments nor at prolonging them in pure contentiousness. Now, the second context is that massive body of discourse in mainstream Sunni legal theory on the method known as qiyas al-illah, a kind of causal correlational inference, often, though quite reductively, translated as analogy, and which served as a primary tool for discovering God's law wherever it was not clearly indicated or accessible through less risky hermeneutical pathways. A typical instance of qiyas al-illah, that is, qiyas of the legal cause or occasioning factor, has four components. The asl, or root case, being the authoritatively settled case from which one reasons. The far', or branch case, being the contended case for which a solution is claimed. The hukm, or ruling, being the root case's solution claimed also to apply to the branch case. And the illah, or legal cause, which, shared by the branch case and claimed to cause the ruling in the source case, is reasoned to cause that same ruling in the branch case, and thus solving the issue. So juristic expressions of qiyas al-illah, can be surprisingly terse. For example, one might say, drinking date wine is forbidden because it is an intoxicant like grape wine. That is, drinking date wine is the contended branch case. Forbidden is the ruling. Because it is an intoxicant is the claimed legal cause, and grape wine is the authoritative source case. As should be plain, determining what is the illah, the legal cause in one's authoritative source case, is of the utmost importance for performing qiyas al-illah, and for this, jurists developed a number of tools and methods. One such method was to ensure the causal consistency of one's legal cause by determining its co-presence, or tard, with the same ruling it is claimed to cause. In whatever case that legal cause exists, there too should we also find that ruling. Which brings us to the two related concepts with which we are most concerned today. First is Naqḍ, the objection of causal inconsistency. It is a denial of co-presence, a charge that what one claims to be a legal cause exists in another case without the ruling it supposedly occasions. The second is takhsis al-illah, specialization of the cause, the idea that a legal cause might be specialized such that it can be present in a case without its ruling, due to the presence of an impeding factor or mani' or unfulfilled condition or shart, which prevents its occasioning of that ruling. Now, this juristic conception of naqd was often defined in such simple terms as presence of the cause despite absence of the ruling, wujud al-illa ma'a adam al-hukm, or detachment of the ruling from the cause, takhalaf al-hukm an al-illa, or manifestation of the cause despite detachment of the ruling, ibda al-illa ma'a takhalaf al-hukm, or various combinations of these terms and others. This notion of naqd centers on the detachment or takhalluf of the ruling from the cause and can be illustrated as follows. R, the respondent, claims consuming date wine is forbidden because it is fermented, like grape wine. Q, the questioner, objects. If consuming grape wine were forbidden because it is fermented, then consuming vinegar would also be forbidden because it is also fermented. But it isn't forbidden. That is, the ruling of forbidden is detached from the purported cause of being fermented in the naqd case of vinegar. This indicates for us that being fermented is not the cause of proscription. But that is just the juristic jedel conception of naqd. In its quest for universality, the adab al-bath wal-munazara definition of naqd was eventually expanded in two ways. First, it grew to encompass syllogistic arguments in general, not just qiyas al-illa. It became oriented at the indicant or dalil rather than at the illa or legal cause. Second, it broadened to include all manner of untenable consequences, not just detachment of ruling from legal cause or indicant, but the entailment of absurdities or impossibilities. Thus, later definitions of naqd, now called naqd ijmali or collective inconsistency, are articulated as denials or falsifications of the indicant, the dalil, due to a kind of evidence or shahid, either detachment, takhalluf, the indicant applying to another case without the judgment it is supposed to indicate, or entailing the absurd, ilzam al-muhal, and other ways of expressing that, the completed indicant entailing an absurdity or invalidity like circularity, infinite regress, or the conjoining of contradictories. To borrow an example from Galenbavi, R, the respondent claims, writing this book is a significant undertaking. Every significant undertaking must be prefaced by praise be to God. Therefore, writing this book must be prefaced by praise be to God. Now, first, the questioner, Q, might object by takhalluf-based naqd, saying, well, significant undertaking also applies to reading or writing the Quran, but prefacing by praise be to God is not obligatory for that. Second, the questioner might object by absurd entailment-based naqd, saying, but prefacing with praise be to God is itself a significant undertaking. So it must also be prefaced by another praise be to God, which in turn must be prefaced by another praise be to God, and so on ad infinitum, which of course is absurd. Now, in the longer version of this talk, I speak more about my approach with some caveats, etc. A key point is that in this first approach, I will set aside the massive complex of arguments around the validity and application of naqd, and instead collect naqd relevant definitions and expository material spanning the length and breadth of dialectical theory in Islam. I believe tracing shifting conceptions and formulae over time will not only provide a provisional historical trajectory of naqd evolution, but will invite hypotheses as to the rational dynamics behind the transformations observed. And already this exploration has generated several hundred pages of notes. Now, again, if you'd like, I will send you a PDF with these parts that I'm skipping. Here I show the authors and works examined so far, highlighted in blue, which provisional listing of authors and works will continue to grow as I determine what is both relevant and, of course, manageable. And I also provide an idea of what the current study will not cover: non-definitional material, social contexts, etc. So now we can begin our exploration of 1,000 years of Naqḍ theory. So far as my in-progress pursuit of definitional material can tell us at this time, and only for the sake of marking important trends while heeding the usual caveats regarding periodization and chronological divisions, we may tentatively consider the overall history of conceptions of Naqḍ in 8 stages as follows. The first stage spans roughly the 8th to 10th centuries CE and includes a prevalent proto-system practice of Naqḍ, followed by some early iterations of Naqḍ theory, but without any attempted definitions, or at least none that I have found so far. The second stage spans roughly the first half of the 11th century CE and includes our earliest extant definitions of Naqḍ, as they occur in the full system Gedel theory, which evolved from the proto-system practice. The third stage spans roughly the second half of the 11th century CE and marks a significant elaboration on Naqḍ definitions in what we might refer to as classical juristic dialectic, or Gedel. The fourth stage spans roughly the end of the 12th to the end of the 13th century CE and marks the continuing development of Naqḍ definitions in what we might call post-classical juristic Gedel and proto-Adab al-Beth, by which I mean that stream of juristic dialectic which was the foundation and immediate ancestor of the Adab al-Beth wal-Munazara. The fifth stage spans roughly the 14th century CE and is marked by a seminal event in the early Adab al-Beth, what I would call the Dalil expansion of Naqḍ, namely the definitional shift from a narrower cause-oriented Naqḍ to a broader indicant-oriented Naqḍ, alongside the continuity of a post-classical Gedel, which was largely restricted by this time to specific chapters in works of legal theory, usul al-fiqh. The sixth stage spans roughly the 15th and 16th centuries CE and is distinguished by a seminal event in the maturing Adab al-Beth, what I would call the Shahid expansion of Naqḍ, namely the definitional shift to a broader evidence-based Naqḍ, which incorporated, along with inconsistent causal claims, the entailment of absurdities and other invalidities like circularity and infinite regress. The seventh stage spans roughly the 17th and 18th centuries CE and is marked by what I would call the contextual expansion of Naqḍ, that is, contextual in terms of the formalization of additional applications and orientations, whether Naqḍ was aimed at claim, definition, or analytical division, taqsim, or in a quasi or verificational manner. And finally, the eighth stage spans roughly the 19th and 20th centuries CE and should trace the transition from pre-modern to modern Naqḍ theory. At the time of writing, this remains completely unexplored territory for me, but is sure to expose both a conscious continuity and a conscious transformation of Naqḍ theory under the disruptive pressures of modern epistemes. So for the time being, we'll just approach only the first 7 stages in more detail. And in fact, we'll mostly skip through the first stage illustrations, at least from the original talk. But suffice it to say for now that there remains much more to explore in this first stage, which is clearly marked by the pre-theory, proto-system teaching and practice of such as Abu Hanifa and his companions, and especially, of course, of Shafi. This practice contributed directly to the earliest extant Naqḍ theory and formulae, which we find in what survives of Al-Ash'ari and Al-Khafaf and others. Early theory works by Al-Jassas and Al-Baqilani employ Naqḍ-relevant vocabulary and concepts, but never define Naqḍ. The same holds true for the Aristotelian Gedel of Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina. Now, we'll have to skip through this example of a Shafi's pre-theory practice of Naqḍ, and we'll skip through Ibn Furak here forwarding the Jadal theory of al-Ash'ari. This is his description and rejection of Takhsis al-Illah. But here we have al-Ash'ari's signs of defeat, his inqita', 3 of which were relevant to Naqḍ. In fact, in order to gain a quick idea of how al-Ash'ari theorized Naqḍ without overtly defining it, to my knowledge, we can pause to look at his first sign of defeat, as conveyed by Ibn Furak. So, the first of the 7 modes of inqita' is that he performed causal justification, ta'alil, by way of a cause which he does not apply to its effect. Al-Ash'ari said, it is like one saying, it is a racehorse, because he made it run for 2 farsakhs and it did not stumble. So it is said to him, have you considered every horse you made run 2 farsakhs and it didn't stumble to be a racehorse? Then if he says yes, he has applied his cause to its effect. But if he says no, then he has undone it, that is, proven it inconsistent. Naqḍaha, right? So why is this? It's because he claims the cause of a horse's being a racehorse is it's not stumbling over 2 farsakhs. Thus, if he says of another horse with this quality that it is not a racehorse, then we could charge him with naqḍ, inconsistency. Note that naqḍ is thus related to a failed application of the cause to its effects, ijra' al-'illah fi ma'lulatiha, an early expression of causal concomitance expressed in later theory as tard wal-aqs, co-presence and co-absence, and dawaran, causal concomitance. And as is obvious in this example, though not defined as such, this naqḍ is a matter of the cause being present without the ruling. Now we go to the second stage, which is where things start to take off. The second stage unfolded in roughly the first half of the 11th century CE, and it is marked by, among other things, the appearance in full system Jadal theory of multiple definitions of naqḍ, most often in terms of the presence, wujud, of the legal cause and the absence, adam, of the ruling. Naqḍ at this time seems mostly equated to specialization of the cause, takhsis al-illah, and we even find some simple typologies based on the legal causes modality. Although it almost certainly had ancestors in no longer extant works, the oldest extant definition of naqḍ may in fact belong to the Hanbali al-Uqbari, who says in his Risala fi Usul al-Fiqh, naqḍ is presence of the cause despite absence of the ruling. Wujud al-illah ma' adam al-hukm. Now, similar definitions and or notions are evident in works by al-Baghdadi, al-Basri, and al-Qadi Abu Ya'la. The Hanafi ad-Dabusi, on the other hand, defined the cognate munaqaba as existence of the cause but no ruling. Wujud al-illah wa la hukm. With the Dabusi, we also find an enduring typology of naqḍ, based on whether it is directed against an efficient cause, illa mu'athira, clearly designated by a divinely sanctioned source, or against a cause which has been rationally inferred, mustanbata, known merely by its showing co-presence, its tardiyah. The former is not subjected to munaqada, as a Dabusi explains, because the definition of munaqada is that the cause is present in the manner in which it was posited as a cause, with neither an impeding factor, a mana, nor a ruling along with it. So it is in the same status as the witness denying his testimony. But this is inconceivable after the cause's efficiency, or ta'thir, has been affirmed by way of an indicant subject to consensus, ijma', because naqḍ is not brought against consensus or univocal text, nas. Its use, however, might be denied due to an impeding factor, the mana. Now, in his Kitab al-Qiyas al-Shar'i, however, the Hanafi Mu'tazili al-Basri puts forward a different typology, saying, as for naqḍ, it is presence of the cause in a locus from which its ruling was absent. Due to this, when the causal justifier, that is R, the respondent, establishes his cause for the general collective, the jumla, but it is shown inconsistent or nuqda by the special particular, the tafsil, this is not naqd, because the cause's ruling itself, that is in the respondent's root case, is the general collective, which was not absent from the locus in which the cause was found, that is in the questioner's naqd case. Only the particularized ruling was absent, and that particularized ruling was not the cause's ruling, which was connected to the cause in R's root case. As for if the causal justifier establishes his cause for the special particular, the tafsil, and it is shown inconsistent by the general collective, the jumla, then this is a valid naqd, because the particularizing of R's root case is subsumed by the collective of Q's naqd case. Now note that although it is tempting to see a connection here between, on the one hand, naqd by way of the jumla and naqd by way of the tafsil, and on the other, post-classical typology of naqd tafsili and naqd ijmali, there's no obvious relation. With al-Basri, this classification has to do with the general or particular scope of the opposing cases. The questioners for the particular naqd case cannot fully contradict the respondents for the collective root case. Valid naqd can only be with a for the collective naqd case subsuming a for the particular root case. This is completely different from the post-classical naqd tafsili versus naqd ijmali distinction, where the scopes of particular and collective qualify the targets of naqd. Naqd tafsili denies a specified premise of R's indicant or dalil, while naqd ijmali denies the whole dalil itself, with all its premises, with none being singled out in particular. Now we move on to the third stage, which unfolded in roughly the second half of the 11th century CE, and in which we have entered the full-on classical elaboration on naqd definitions. Here we find detailed, comprehensive theories for naqd and taqsis al-illa, along with new definitions incorporating new terms like detachment, takalluf, of ruling from cause, and manifestation, iddat, of cause without ruling, etc. Naqd is now clearly differentiated from taqsis al-illa. The former is an objection, the latter is a justification, and paths are elaborated for the defense and attack of both, while additional typologies based on the legal causes modality appear. While al-Bazdawi forwards and refines Debussi's naqd typology based on whether the illa is efficient, mu'athira, or merely shows co-presence, tardiya, al-Ghazali reports a related typology based on whether the illa is textually designated, mansusa, or purely rationally inferred, mustanbata. And the Shirazi and his student al-Baji bring forward a naqd typology based on whether the illa has been posited for individuals or for the genus, and would hence be equivalent to a definition. The opening of Shirazi's treatment of naqd in his self-commentary, the Sharh al-Luma, provides a clear view of his conception of naqd. The sixth objection is naqd, which is presence of the cause but no ruling, wujud al-illa wala hukm. This is like when one draws indication for the problem question of intent in the ritual ablution by the fact that it is a ritual purification, and so does not require intent, like the removal of impure filth. So the Shafi'i says, this is undone, yantaqidu, by clean earth ablution, tayammum, for it is a ritual purification, but despite that, it requires intent. Shirazi now brings another example from outside the legal realm, saying, a parallel of this for the intellective propositions, the aqliyat, is that someone has two sons and gives one of them a gift. Then an observer says to him, why did you give him this? And he says, because he is my son. So the observer says, this is not valid because the other is also your son, but you did not give him anything. Thus, it must be that your son that you're giving to him is due to something else. And if he then says, I gave it to him because he is my son and he is dutiful, while the other is disobedient, then we will say, well, then you should have said because he is a dutiful son, for your giving to him was due to these two qualities. Thus, you forsake mentioning, if you forsake mentioning one of the two, you are not responding to what you were asked about. Shirazi continues by suggesting how to avoid naqd, but we'll skip this for now. It is in Al-Juwayni's definitions that new elements appear, including what may be the first extant appearance of the important term detachment, takhalluf. In his Burhan fi Usul al-Fiqh, he says, the fourth among objections is naqd, which is detachment of the ruling in one of the cases, takhalluf al-hukm fi ba'ad al-sur, despite the presence of what the causal justifier claimed to be a cause. And in his Kafiyah fil Jadal, he says the definition or head of naqd is negation of the ruling from what was claimed for it in terms of the cause. And it is said presence of the cause despite loss of what was claimed in terms of its ruling. And it is said manifestation of the cause where there is no ruling. Ibda' al-illa haythu la hukm. This reported use of ibda', manifestation, with respect to the legal cause may be the oldest extant, along with the use of takhalluf in the Burhan. And both were employed by Al-Juwayni's hugely influential student Al-Ghazali in his definitions and descriptions of naqd. In his Mankhul, Al-Ghazali says the third species of objections is naqd. Its meaning is manifestation of the cause despite detachment of the ruling, ibda' al-illa ma'a takhalluf al-hukm. And in his Muntakhil, he combines definition with an explanation as to why takhsis al-illa should be disallowed, saying, the meaning of naqd is manifestation of a problem case and presence of the cause in it, despite absence of the ruling. And if this is brought against the respondent's causal justification, his ta'alil, then it is nullified. Nor is it allowed for the causal justifier, that's the respondent, to assert takhsis al-illa, saying it is a cause wherever it shows co-presence, as some of the people profess, because the reason for connecting the ruling to the imagined cause is its conveyance of overwhelming probability, ghalabat al-zann, that it is designated by the lawgiver, and it's being an anchoring place, a manat, for the ruling. And if we see the cause existing while the ruling does not exist along with it, then its being a cause does not overwhelm probability. On to the fourth stage, which unfolded roughly from the end of the 12th to the end of the 13th century CE, and brings us into the era of post-classical Jadal and what I call the proto-Adab al-Beth, which is the Eastern Jadal or Khilaf tradition from which the Adab al-Beth wal Munazara was to grow. In this 100-year span, we see a continuity of classical naqd alongside the new proto-Adab tradition, which included a new typology based on the naqd cases modality, and perhaps the first indicant or dalil-oriented as opposed to illa-oriented naqd. We also find the prescription of formulae for declaring or reconstructing naqd, called tawjih or taqrir, and a further systematization of the relation between naqd and takhsis al-illa. As far as definitions are concerned, previous styles in terms of the presence, wujud, and manifestation, ibda', of the cause, and detachment or takhalluf of the ruling, continued in the theory of Fakhruddin al-Razi, Sayfuddin al-Amidi, Ibn al-Hajib, Ibn Surur, and Ibn Sa'ati, with slight variants, like the use of without, bidun, to refer to the ruling's absence by Ibn Qudama and al-Baydawi, and the sometime exchange of property, wasf, for cause, illa, by al-Razi, al-Baydawi, and the Tufi. They would use cause or property. An important addition to definitions was the more regular appending of phrases like fi suratin ma, in some case or another, drawing attention to that vital component of takhalluf-based naqd, the counter case, which shows the inconsistency. Thus, we find Razi, for example, saying the following in his Ma'alam fi Usul al-Fiqh. The second method, which indicates the property is not right for causation, is naqd, which is that the property is present in one of the cases, fi ba'd sur, despite absence of the ruling. The conception of naqd took a radical new direction, however, in the proto-adab of Burhanuddin al-Nasafi, who now spoke in terms of realization of the shared property, the haquq al-mushtarak, and detachment of the ruling, takhalluf al-hukm. This may in turn have influenced Abu Abdullah al-Isfahani, who in his Al-Kashif an al-Mahsul fi ilm al-usul declared, presence of the shared property, the mushtarak, whose causation is claimed without the ruling, is what is called takhalluf and naqd. Perhaps most importantly, we see in Abu Abdullah al-Isfahani's Al-Qawa'id al-Kulliyya fi Jumlat min al-Funun al-Ilmiyya what may be our oldest extant expansion of naqd from a narrower illa orientation to a broader dalil orientation, when he says, naqd is presence of the indicant despite detachment of the judgment assertion from it. Wujud dalil ma'a takhalluf al-hukm anhu. Note that the title of the work, Al-Qawa'id al-Kulliyya, bears witness to the author's patently universalist intentions, allowing us to argue that a universalizing impetus lies behind that broadening of naqd definitions, which marks the following stages of naqd evolution. As far as typologies are concerned, older illa mansusa versus illa mustanbata and illa mu'athira versus illa tardiya notions continued with al-Amidi and the Tufi, and in the same stage, a new typology arrived in that Eastern Jedel theory of al-Amidi and Nasafi. That's Burhanuddin al-Nasafi. Here, naqd is either specified, mu'ayyan, or unspecified, majhul, and these types can be either simple, mufrad, compound, murakkab, or neither in terms of the sources for their rulings. Now, interestingly, as important as An-Nasafi's Fusul was, this typology was not taken up by Samarkandi and is simply absent from the following centuries of Adab al-Bath. It just never took off. There are other important developments in this stage, but perhaps most interesting is that naqd discourse had become recognized as its own special problem, and a difficult one at that. In his Kashif an al-Mahsul, Abu Abdullah al-Isfahani says, "Know, and God may he be exalted give you success, that this mas'ala is considered to be among the more difficult to comprehend of the masail, so let the investigator be acquainted with it and examine it closely." And Saifuddin al-Amidi also describes the topic as obscure and problematic, blaming jurists' imprecise understanding of what a cause is. But we'll skip that for now. On to the fifth, and I have named the fifth stage, unfolding roughly in the 14th century CE, for its most important development, the dalil expansion of naqd, that simple exchange of legal cause, or illa, for indicant, dalil, which, in stride with the universalist agenda of the Adab al-Bath, recognized the application of naqd across multiple disciplines. The new systematization of dalil-oriented naqd included a new typology, whereby naqd proper was labeled ijmali, collective, and munaqada, now consistently equated to the denial or mena of a specific premise of the indicant, as opposed to the whole indicant itself, was called tafsili, particularizing naqd. There was a continuity of classical alongside Samarkandian naqd. I'm calling it after Shamsuddin Samarkandi, and sometimes hybrids. The topical scope of naqd also expanded in this stage with recognized naqd of definitions, indicants, conditions, causes, and universal propositions, though at the same time definitions appear restricted to takhalluf-based naqd, all instances of naqd which did not show takhalluf of the hukm from the dalil were to be identified with obstinate contentiousness, mukabara. Importantly, however, prescribed formulae, tawjih or taqrir, for naqd ijmali were commonly preferred, and outside of theory works, we can discern the practice and reconstruction of naqd ijmali, identified by name, with the soon-to-be recognized untenable consequences of circularity, dawr, and infinite regress, tasalsul, as well as detachment, takhalluf. So, though here in practice, the shahid expansion, which marks the sixth stage, seems not yet to have been articulated in the theory of the fifth. But the fifth stage's seminal achievement was that first rigorous dalil-oriented naqd definition of Shamsuddin Samarkandi, who stated clearly in his Risala fi Adab al-Bath, naqd is detachment of the judgment assertion from the indicant, takhalluf al-hukm an a dalil. In fact, we need not doubt that this was a deliberate definitional shift, as a Samarkandi in his commentary on Nasafi's Fusul acknowledges it himself, saying, naqd is an explanation of the detachment of the ruling from what is presumed to be something which affirms it. It is general in scope, it is am, being directed in relation to the indicant and causes according to the verifiers, the muhaqqiqeen. But most of the Ahl al-Nazar made it specific to the cause in qiyas. Now this is important. Having provided a very broad definition of naqd, Samarkandi then asserts that it is general for both dalil and illah, attributing this view to the verifiers, the muhaqqiqs. This is the sort of bridge we hope to find, the actual moment where a shift is recognized from an only illah-oriented to a broader illah and dalil-oriented naqd. Moreover, Samarkandi exposes in a most systematic way, which I have elsewhere referred to as active quality-based derivation, the relation of naqd to the other master category objections of denial or mana and counter-indication, mu'arada, by showing how they all derive from a restricted set of possible moves. He says, if the questioner denies after the indicant's completion, that is when after the respondent has completed his indicant, then this denial will be according to two types. For either he does not concede the indicant after its completion based on the judgment's detachment from it, takhalluf al-hukm anhu, in one or another of its cases, or he concedes the indicant but denies the thing indicated, the madlul, drawing indication by what negates the indicated thing's affirmation. The first is naqd ijmali, and the second, you might recognize, is mu'arrada, counter-indication. For we know that naqd is either particularizing, tafsili, that being the aforementioned munaqada, or collective, ijmali. Its proper formulation, its tawjih, is that one say, what you stated of a dalil is not valid due to the judgment's detachment from it, takhalluf al-hukm anhu, in this other case. As for mu'arada, its way is that one says, even if what you stated indicates the affirmation of the indicated thing, still we have that which negates it. Note that in so doing, Samarkandi has at once introduced and justified the new ijmali tafsili typology, defined naqd ijmali, and supplied us with a prescribed articulation for it, the tawjih. These features were not only forwarded by early commentators like al-Bihishti al-Isfara'ini, but they inspired hybrids in the theory of later authors like Tajuddin as-Subki. Now, there is more said on this stage, but I'll skip it to save time. And we'll move on to the sixth stage, which unfolded in roughly the 15th and 16th centuries CE, and is again named for its most important development, what I call the shahid expansion of naqd. That is the first definitional shifts from takhalluf-based, detachment-based naqd to a broader shahid-based evidence-based naqd. Finally, multiple shahid-based definitions appear, subsuming along with takhalluf, entailing the absurd, ilzam al-muhal, or entailing another invalidity, istilzam fasad akhar, and other expressions, with these absurdities or invalidities including circularity, infinite regress, the conjoining of contradictories, etc. And commensurate to this, the responses to naqd are updated to include, for example, the respondent's denial of the claimed entailment or absurdity of the ilzam al-muhal, which the questioner attached to his dalil. The tafsili ijmali distinction introduced by a Samarkandi becomes the standard in the Adab al-Bath, and a complementary typology appears for the naqd indicant, whether it matches exactly R's dalil, or conveys its gist, or contains certain of its properties. This latter you may recognize as the ancient move of kasr, or breaking, which is now called naqd maksur. And there's also a continuity of older takhalluf-based illa and dalil-oriented definitions with naqd ijmali and new hybrids. Now, as for definitions in this period, the classics with wujud or ibda' for the illa and adam or bidun for the hukm continue to be forwarded by such as al-Jurjani, Mullah Fanari, and al-Badakhshi. Importantly, al-Badakhshi overtly subsumes a classical formula under the newer Samarkandian Naqd Ijmali in his commentary on al-Baydawi's Minhaj al-Wusul called Manahij al-Uqul. He says, Naqd is two species: denial of the premise in a particular way, tafsilin, and that is called munaqada in the art of dialectical investigation, and in a collective way, ijmalan, like when one says, if the premises of your indicant were valid, while they operate in this case, that is the naqd case, then the ruling would have been affirmed in it, but it is not affirmed. This is called naqd ijmali, and what we're occupied with here, that is in al-Baydawi's Minhaj al-Wusul, namely manifestation of the property whose causation is claimed without the ruling, is of the second type, that is naqd ijmali, as is no secret, and it is also called takhsis al-illa. But of course, the key innovation of this sixth stage is the shahid expansion, and its first overt appearance, so far as I have found to date, is in al-Jurjani's Hashia on al-Razia Tahtani's Sharh of al-Urmawi's logic text Mutala' al-Anwar. Al-Jurjani says, Naqd is the denial, the mena, of a premise, not exactly as it is, that is unspecified, and for that there is no escaping a piece of evidence, a shahid, by which one testifies, namely either 1. Detachment of the judgment assertion from the indicant in a case, takhaluf al-hukm an dalil fi suratan, or 2. Its validity and completion with all its premises entailing an absurdity, a muhal, since upon the two hypothetical assumptions there is no escaping the faultiness of that non-specified premise. Whether or not al-Jurjani was its author, we find a clearer statement in the Adab al-Bath treatise attributed to him, the Risala Sharifiyya, whose author states, Naqd is the falsification of the indicant after its completion, adhering to a piece of evidence, a shahid, which indicates that proof-seeking by way of it is unmerited, namely its entailing some invalidity or other, istilzamahu fasadin ma. It is divided into claim of detachment, takhalluf, or entailment of an absurdity, luzum al-muhal, and it is also called naqd ijmali. And the piece of evidence, the shahid, is what indicates the indicant's invalidity. Note that the author speaks in terms of entailing an invalidity, istilzam fasad, rather than entailing an absurdity, istilzam muhal. This may show the influence of an important commentary on a Samarkandi, which in fact brings together his dalil expansion with this new shahid expansion. It is the so-called Mas'udi, named after its author, Mas'ud al-Shirwani al-Rumi, who actually corrects Samarqandi's definition as follows. The lemma is the bold script, and Shirwani al-Rumi's commentary is the remainder. Naqḍ is detachment of the judgment assertion from the indicant takhaluf al-hukm an ad-dalil, which indicates it. That is, indicates the judgment assertion in one of the cases according to the conceptualization of which is forthcoming. And here there are inquiries. He starts to list them. The first or the second, we'll skip those. The third inquiry is the verification or tahqiq that naqḍ is not specific to the mentioned detachment or takhalluf. On the contrary, it is an expression for the denial of the indicant, in that one say, this indicant is not valid, drawing indication by way of it is not merited, due either to the mentioned judgment assertion's detachment from it, al-hukm anhu, or due to its entailing another invalidity, istilzamuhu fasadin akhar, in whatever mode may be from among the particular types. And then he goes on with other inquiries. So the influence of this broad conception of naqḍ is certainly to be found in the legal theory and dialectic of Mullah Fanari, whose hybrid dialectic includes the classical presence of the cause despite absence of the ruling, wujud al-illa ma'a adam al-hukm, and detachment of the ruling from the property claimed to be the cause, takhaluf al-hukm an al-wasf al-mudda'a illatan, and a twice expanded naqḍ ijmali, which is based on detachment from the indicant, takhalluf, or the entailment of something absurd, luzum al-muhal. The Mas'udi's formula is also echoed in the commentary tradition on Al-Iji's Adab al-Beth, with Mullah Hanafi even recognizing a historical discourse on this shahid expansion, having explained that when Al-Iji said by way of takhalluf, he meant detachment of the judgment assertion from the indicant. He goes on to say, here there is a famous problem question, a su'al mashhur, and thereafter he reproduces this statement of Mas'udi nearly verbatim. Now, as much as I hate to do it, I will skip through Tash Kubrazadeh to save time. Suffice it to say that with him, the shahid has taken center stage, and in a relatively rare exposition for our benefit, he provides an explanation of precisely why takhalluf and istilzam al-muhal constitute evidence. So we're approaching now the limits of this ongoing research. As mentioned, I have not yet begun to explore the eighth and final stage of Naqḍ evolution, and this seventh stage, itself largely unexplored, will be the last thing we look at today. So unfolding in roughly the 17th and 18th century CE, its prominent features so far might be called a contextual expansion with new, more systematic contextual categories and typologies. These included new considerations as to whether Q's naqd was aimed at R's claim, definition, or analytical division, his taqsim, and whether Q's objection was a kind of quasi-naqd or naqd shabihi, aimed at R's unsupported claim, or a properly verificational, tahqiqi, naqd ijmali, aimed at R's whole indicant. These were accompanied by more rigorously syllogistic renderings for both takhalluf-based and istilzam muhal-based naqd, a new emphasis on clearer illustrations and updated responses to these new formulations of naqd. Now, even with the mere trio of authors examined so far, there are far too many elements to cover here. Some of the main features, however, are apparent in Sajaqlizadeh's Adab treatise, Risala al-Waladiyya, particularly in the opening section of its third maqala, which I will quote here in full with a few comments interjected. The third maqala on Naqḍ, and it might be restrictively qualified by ijmali. Its meaning is that the questioner claims falsity of the causal justifier's indicant, drawing indication by the fact that it, that is ars indicant, applies in some other claim despite the detachment of the thing claimed from it. And every indicant in such a state is false, because the thing claimed does not detach from the valid indicant, because the thing claimed is a thing entailed, or lazim, belonging to it, and falsity of the thing entailed indicates the falsity of the entailer, the malzum. You might recognize this as the modus tollens. So here we have a new syllogistic tawjih for takhalluf-based naqd ijmali, justified by evoking the implicative relation between indicant and claim, and the operation of the modus tollens, by which the claim's falsity necessitates that of its indicant. Sajaqlizadeh continues with an example. It's like our saying to the philosopher who is drawing indication for the pre-eternality of the world by way of the fact that it is an effect of God the pre-eternal, Athar al-Qadim, that it, ars indicant, applies in the case of daily occurring things which come to be, hawadith yawmiyah, despite the fact that they are things which come to be by primitive intuition. One does not respond to this naqd by denying the major premise, but by denying the minor premise, and since the minor includes two premises, by denying the application or jarayan at some times and the detachment, the takhalluf, at others. In other words, R does not attempt to rebut Q's premise that every indicant showing takhalluf is false, but rather focuses on the claim that his dalil applies in the naqd case, or the claim that his judgment is detached from it therein. Sajaqlizadeh now shifts to ilzam muhal-based naqd, saying, and the one doing naqd might draw indication for the falsity of the causal justifier's indicant by way of the fact that it is something which entails circularity or infinite regress, which is absurd, muhal, and everything that entails the absurd is itself absurd. So it, that is ars indicant, is absurd. And here there is also no room for denying the major premise. On the contrary, one might deny the entailing, the istilzam, and one might entail, or one might deny the impossibility, the istihala, because some circularities or regresses are not absurd. And one might respond to the naqd in an absolute way, mutlaqan, by affirming the claim whose indicant was undone by way of another indicant. Now, finally, as for Galenbavi, his Risalat al-Adab, though not large in size, is nevertheless impressively comprehensive and clear. This holds for his treatment of naqd as it does for all the moves and elements he covers. First, when R does not provide indication or istidlal in support of his claim, Galenbavi lists three tasks for the questioner. The second of these, he says, is naqd shabihi, quasi-inconsistency, to borrow the way Khalil Rahab translates it, which is that this claim is falsified by explaining its entailing something among the invalidities, like circularity and infinite regress, without the hypothetical assumption of an indicant against it from your side. Put differently, if R does not provide a dalil for his claim, Q does not need to provide a dalil for his naqd. Hence, it is only naqd shabihi. However, when R does provide proper indication for his claim, Galenbavi again lists three tasks for the questioner. The second, he says, is naqd ijmali tahqiqi, which is falsification of the indicant by explaining its application, jariyan, in another matter which is not characterized by the ruling of your claim, or by explaining its entailment of another invalidity like circularity or infinite regress, or the conjoining or cancellation of two contradictories, and the like of that. And he now provides the proper formula, the tawjih. One should say, this indicant applies in such and such a matter despite the detachment therein of the claim's ruling from it, or it is something which entails such and such an invalidity, and every dalil of this sort is invalid, so this dalil is invalid. And there is no room for denying the major premise of this naqd. On the contrary, the application, the jariyan, or entailing, istilzam, is denied sometimes, and the detachment, takhalluf, or other invalidity, fasad akhir, other times. So just like Sajaqlizadeh, Galenbavi provides us a rigorously syllogistic tawjih, carefully directing ours denials against the now standard elements of naqd, the dalil's application in the naqd case, and detachment of its ruling therein, or the dalil's entailment of another untenable consequence and the invalidity of that consequence. Nor is this all he brings us. Beyond claim-based disputation, Galenbavi's adab encompasses definition-based and disjunctive division or taqsim-based disputation. Accordingly, the questioner is provided 3 species of naqd to bring against ours definition, and 4 species of naqd to bring against ours disjunctive division. And needless to say, he also provides tailored rebuttals to these. So, at this early stage of research, I am not ready to make any more than the most general of observations and hypotheses. We have seen naqd transform from a nameless but regular practice to a theorized but undefined objection, to a systematically elaborated critical move defined in terms of presence of cause and absence of ruling, to a more refined move defined in terms of the ruling's detachment from the cause, to a broader, more universal critique oriented against ours dalil rather than illah, the dalil expansion, to a yet broader critique incorporating untenable consequences of absurdity and invalidity, as well as detachment, the shahid expansion, to a more rigorously syllogistic, multi-contextual naqd. And we haven't even seen what transpires in the 19th and 20th centuries yet. So why did it evolve as it did? There may have been 2 or more dynamics at work which drove naqd to evolve as it did, including, first of all, the pressure exerted by the pursuit of universality. And second of all, the inescapable realization upon repeated inquiries and controversies as to the nature and viability of naqd, that it really is ultimately about a kind or kinds of untenable consequence, and thus much in the way of a reductio. The quest for universality may have encouraged the loading of more into naqd than was originally there in the older theory, so that more ground could be covered in more topical domains with a singular category of objection, while deeper and deeper analyses over time only proved that such a broader conception of naqd had been justified all the while. The detachment, takhalluf, of ruling from legal cause or indicant is, after all, but one kind of untenable consequence, along with others like circularity, infinite regress, and conjoining of or co-canceling contradictions. So there's a great deal more which awaits to be discovered. In particular, a deep dive into the 1,000-year controversy over the exact nature, validity, and applications of naqd should shed significant light on why it evolved as it did. And with naqd being so central and critical an objection in every dialectical scheme across all disciplines, uncovering the dynamics of naqd evolution will teach us volumes about the evolution of Islamicate dialectics as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you, Walter, for this meticulous, interesting presentation.
I'm so glad you stayed awake.
Since I'm not a specialist in this field, and I mean there is only us on the platform, I may ask your permission to give me your permission to ask you some general and or some let's say broad questions to facilitate the task to our audience. but it depends on your permission.
Well, before that, I can answer them. So please go ahead.
Before that, I received a question from a colleague from Malaysia, and it's there in front of you. Can you read it? I am Faizul from Malaysia. I have questions about النقض. The difference between نقد in fiqh and theology discussion. The second question, there is other تخلف مدلول in دليل and إلزام المحال, like this argument contra with usual أصول مذهب. Sorry,
I'm not sure I understand the second part of the question. But first, hello to Faisal in Malaysia.
Yes.
I just returned from Doha, where the Qatar Debate Society had a magnificent conference, and for debate societies all over the world. One of the biggest things that ever happened for the field of Islamicate dialectics, in fact. And of course, there are Malaysia is well represented by scholars like Shamsuddin Arif and others who were speaking there. As for the difference between Naqḍ in fiqh and theology, I would say that there's probably nothing significant. If we see in the very beginning, it's Al-Ash'ari whose earliest extant theory that we have. We think that he was, we know he was responding, in fact, supporting the Kitab al-Jadal of Ibn Rawandi, no less, who had come under attack by al-Qabi al-Balkhi. There's the only difference would come about between that difference that we know between the illah shar'iyya and the illah aqliyya. Whether you're talking about normative cause, which is prescribed by God either directly or indirectly, or natural causes, or purely intellective causes. How that manifests itself, I'm not exactly sure. That's a great field of inquiry to look into. But I would say that even though we talk drawing on Larry Miller's dissertation, and which is now published, by the way, also with Springer. Highly recommended, of course. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. In this book, he speaks in terms of theological jedel and juristic jedel, and that the jurists sort of took over what the theologians were doing. I think it's much more complicated than that. It was always mixed together. Many of our great dialecticians wore many hats. So they were, like Abu Hanifa was a theologian and a jurist. So they were using styles of argumentation in many different disciplines simultaneously. So there's a great relation between how they developed. What we see historically is that it was in the realm of law that these books really, the theory became its own kind of genre. And you do find it in theological texts, but as chapters or references. There aren't books of Jedel where the themes discussed are only theological themes. So, and then when it comes to the second question, I'm not sure I understand from the way it's written how to answer that. But please feel free to send me an email, and I'll answer anything that I can to the best of my ability.
Or just to reformulate the second question.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Okay. I mean, another colleague, Cobra Kaya, joined us. Okay. Do you have any question, Cobra Kaya? Or
is that Khadija? I think
I don't know, since anyway. Let me share with you my impression. And there is no impression in scholarship, but when I am so happy to that you accept to give this lecture. Why? Because of a very, very personal reason. The first, one of the reasons is that there are many scholars in Morocco that are interested in the same field. I can mention, I don't know, 3 names, 4 names, and maybe, I mean, by ignorance, I cannot mention more than that. There's a famous now is a famous Moroccan philosopher, Taha Abd Rahman.
Oh yes,
who started this field. I mean, he opened the door of this field in Moroccan university. Then some of his students now they are retired, not young anymore. But one of them is Hammun Naqari. The other, the third name is Muhammad Morsli. The fourth name, I mean, Rashid Al-Radi, and others. There are many. Some of them published some their dissertations, others not yet. But I am so happy. I'm so glad that we need more collaboration and more, I mean, exchange to enhance the interest in this field.
Absolutely. So can I say something at this point?
Yeah. Yes, please. Yes, please.
I absolutely agree with you, and I have to say there's good news for all of us because our field of study is growing in recognition, and in fact, institutions now are beginning to pick up the slack. I mean, in not so much in the West, I'm afraid. In North America and France, in Europe, I'm still having a lot of trouble getting people to understand how important this field is. This is Islamic critical thinking. This is Islamic argumentation theory, and it's 1,200 years old or more, with hundreds upon hundreds of brilliant scholars who are taking the deepest dives into the most fine-grained analyses of logical theory for debate, for how do we discuss and have discourse in constructive, truth-seeking fashions. And it's now, there. I have to mention in Turkey, especially in Istanbul, under the aegis of the Ibn Khaldun University, Recep Şentürk has opened a center. It's called the Argue Munazara Center. It's dedicated to this. It's dedicated to Adab al-Beth and to the scholars, not just the scholarship around it, but reviving it as a real, living, truth-oriented practice in opposition to those styles of debate which may be aimed more at winning. Not to say that I don't want to paint all of competitive debate with the same brush, but there's other styles of debates. And of course, anybody who's watched presidential debates in the U.S. Would probably feel sick in their stomach by what they've seen. It's a circus. It's laughable if it wasn't so horrible, the consequences of it. So this is being supported. What I just mentioned about this big conference in Doha, the International Conference for Debate and Dialogue, which just wrapped up, was a huge event, bringing together people from all over the world, East and West, to discuss modern argumentation, modern debate techniques and concerns, as well as Islamic traditional, historical, intellectual engagement with this. So I could go on and on and on about this, but we have centers that are starting to coalesce and to network with each other, and I think we're going to see in the years to come a big surge of interest. And what I hope the most is practice of Jedel and Munazara, because these are, they're working systems that combined with the right kind of ethic can really probably do a lot of good in the world today. And we desperately need accessible, working, critical disputation methods and practices.
Yeah. Okay. Our friend from Malaysia reformulated his question.
I still can't say I grasp it. The idea that Naqḍ can be expanded if the questioner says this argument is contradiction with your principle of method.
Madhab.
Okay, I think I understand.
Okay.
This is, I mean, from what I've seen, this issue does come up. And when it is a question of a madhab issue, I think it depends on what your pre-commitments are in the debate. But usually, you wouldn't make somebody have to change their madhab if they're arguing consistently within their madhab. So it would be fair game for you to bring Naqḍ to show somebody that they contradicted their own madhab. It is not fair game to show that they're in conflict with principle or ruling in another madhab. That's my understanding of things. If I'm answering your question, I'm still not quite sure if I'm getting it, but it's also a practical consideration. If people have to switch madhabs every time they're shown to be inconsistent, who knows what would happen? But you certainly, and if I may add, I hope I'm on target here, but if I may add, one of the greatest proofs of the practice of these methods of disputation is real, that it really happened in historical times, is the very fact that we have four mainstream Sunni madhahib. How can you have this plurality of opinions, even within madhahib, that are mutually respectful of each other? We have four different, bodies of law, huge corpora of law, four different prominent sets of usul within each madhab, like different toolboxes for each one. And yet, because of their inner consistency, they are respected between each other as having, basically, as being the product of real ijtihad. That's what this whole discipline boils down to, is doing ijtihad together, dialogically, to get to the truth of a matter. And if you do that in your madhab, if your attempts are sincere and you give it all your energy and all your best intellectual striving, then who can say, it's in the end, it's God that can say who is right, who got the closest to his Sharia, right? When there is conflicting opinions about, is it necessary to pay zakat on a young girl's or woman's jewelry or something like that? So the ethic of Jadal and Munazara allows a functional plurality of opinions, and that's desperately something that we need today in this world today, I think.
Okay. Let's share with you some of my questions. When reading some literature, and I mean classical literature, some texts from the Muslim context by Al-Ash'ari or Al-Juwayni or Ibn Aqil al-Hanbali, one might notice many similarities, I mean, in the vocabulary used by them with the vocabulary used by the philosophers, by the logicians. I mean, let's take examples. المجيب, السائل, النقض, المحال, الإلزام, and many terms. My question is simple. How do you explain these similarities? I mean, were there any, I mean, I don't know, it's just by chance, or
no. I would there's several ways to come at this question. One, there's the question of genealogy. What was the first original Islamic dialectical theory or practice? I don't think even that question is easy. A lot of people like to just say, well, then there was Aristotle, and then these people read Aristotle and then they did this. Well, it's not like that at all. Even in the region before Islam arose, there were Aristotelian practices of dialectic that had become something different. They had changed and become more indigenous, or there were already truly indigenous modes of debate and disputation that had never really had anything to do with Aristotle. All these things were there in different places, and when Islam arose, those these pre-Islamic argumentation epistemes is what I refer to them in the book. They were infused with distinctly Islamic axioms to become something new. Now, what happened is Muslims everywhere have new principles to draw on. I mean, if you read the Quran, you see jadal all over the place, and you see, who did a great job was Najmuddin Tufi. Went in and extracted. He basically showed you everything that you need to know about logic is happening here with examples in the Quran. So there was plenty of raw material to draw from without having to go to Aristotle. And that's what Muslim theologians and jurists were doing. And you can see it again in the language. Look at Jadal, for example. Why is Jadal the translation of dialectic? Why not, taking the words and saying dialecticos or something like that, or tupiqa or something like that? But jadal is in the Quran, and this is the language of argument. But so there's that question, the genealogical approach. Once it became an Islamic thing, you have Muslim scholars, especially in the beginning, they weren't separating themselves off into different categories. They were pursuing knowledge. They were pursuing. They were trying to find out how God wants us to behave with each other and with Him, and how to understand His cosmos and all. It was many different, what we see as many different fields. They were pursuing all of them, and so the argument, and they were doing it dialogically, debating with each other. I mean, it's the debates we know from the earliest times. It's some of the earliest literature we have about anything is Muslims arguing about pretty much everything. And this context is what eventually developed into the theory that we came to know as Jadal and Munazara and Adab al-Beth, grew out of the practices. And this is the best part. The theory of Jadal grew out of its own practice. It's a cycle. You start, when you're in the course of an argument, you start off at the level of what is the nature of what the question about zakat on women's jewelry or something like that, and then it comes up to the next level, which is, well, why do you believe that? So you need to have some justification. That now you're in the realm of legal theory, where you're drawing on which usul, right? And then when you're arguing at that point, you might actually say, well, what you just asked me is not a legitimate move. And all of a sudden now you're arguing about the rules of arguing, right? So in the same argument, you might go through these different levels. And when you hit that one about arguing, you're actually doing argumentation theory. And from this, the actual, people started to write it down and to systematize it. And basically, instead of an Aristotle, in Islamic dialectical disputation evolution, you have many Aristotles writing down for the first time and then developing, and different trends, and these cross-germinated because people were reading each other's books, but also some of these great polymaths in Islamic intellectual history were masters in all of the sciences of the time. So contributing to all of them, merging them together.
Yeah. Another question: some scholars, when comparing between the two disciplines, Adab al-Jadal wal-Munadara, and what we call Jadal al-Falasifa, some of them say that Adab or the Jadal of Falasifa is like a normative one. It's like philosophers or logicians try to set norms I mean, when reading, we can discover this, or we can notice this when reading their commentaries on Aristotle's topics or other texts. But when we come to the writing of or adab al-jadal wal-munadara, it's more descriptive. It's like a
descriptive. You mean descriptive as in this is what they've been doing instead of this is what we should be doing?
What we should do. That's it.
I can't imagine why anybody would say that. When you read the literature itself, it is ultimately prescriptive. It is telling you this is the way to do it, and of course with controversy. So you were having different people saying, for example, there's the question that comes up on ghasb. Maybe you've heard of this. It's a very famous. Well, it was a famous issue, but the great majority of dialecticians said that when the questioner can do certain things, but not mu'arada, until the respondent has completely finished explaining their dalil. If you go in before that and you start to give your counter dalil, then that's ghasb, and that's not tolerated. Except Al-Amidi said that, yeah, you can do that. So they had a big discourse over that. I mean, the whole thing, I can't imagine why anyone would say it's purely descriptive. I've seen that argument said about usul al-fiqh. And again, I have to raise my eyebrows. Yes, of course, there are parts that are, or, periods where it is mostly descriptive. But so long as there was anybody who was actually doing legal reasoning, and I would assume that muftis weren't just sitting around making stuff up and delivering fatwas to people that didn't have real problems. We know the opposite is true. The fatwa collections are filled with advanced and sophisticated legal reasoning, drawing on usul al-fiqh and other sources. And the same is true. I think that we can see the marks of jadal and munazara being practiced all over the place. I mean, that's another answer to the question of why is the vocabulary so similar in these different disciplines. It's because they were doing the theory, they were practicing it. Yes, part of it would also have been descriptive. I think there's references to the way. Certainly in juristic jadal, there's references to the way Ibn Surayj used to do things, or Al-Qafal al-Shashi back and then, or they do look back and they take notes on the way the dialecticians of the past did things. But ultimately, the aim of jadal and munazara as a theory is as a method. It's a method to be used, not to just describe what went on in the past. I hope I answered that.
Yeah. I understood your point. I mean, following the same comparison, what would be the end or the purpose of a naqḍ or ilzam? I mean, for example, making your partner incapable to defend his case, or more the ghalaba, the victory of the of the let's say the mujib.
I would say
why I'm putting this question. I have in mind some Al-Farabi's writing when talking about the jadal, and the purpose of the jadal is seeking for the truth seeking. So, and you need to collaborate with your partner. Following the same comparison, some scholar says that there is no collaboration in the jadal according to the falasifa, since the falasifa exclude their their partners, the mutakallimun, for example, or the jurists, for example. That's my question. I don't know whether it's clear or not.
Okay, well, the first part was about naqḍ and what its ultimate aim is. The second part, if I understand, is basically what are the objectives of jadal and munazara? Is it to win? Is it to defeat your opponent, or what is the goal? If you read again, if there's anything that's shakier than psychoanalysis of living people, it's psychoanalysis of long gone people and societies. So what were the motives of individual arguers, or when they were writing or when they were arguing? We'll never know. We can only look at what they prescribed. And when you look at the earliest Jedel material, for example, or the classical Jedel material, it is all about getting to the truth. And it is about being pious in your and self-reflective, and doing things in such a way that are polite. There's some rules where, if you roll your eyes in disgust, the session is over. You broke the rules. you have to be kind and polite and patient, and clear and helpful and cooperative, while of course probably harnessing that competitive spirit that we all have when we take sides on an issue and start debating about it, because we all have a kind of psychological bent towards being right. So you can harness that energy, but you can also make a virtue out of saying, I concede your point. This is showing that you have your eyes on the truth more than on your own victory. Mm-hmm. So there's that psychological aspect. We'll never know, but we do see that it is prescribed in the works to be of this truth-seeking nature, to be genuine, not about winning, not about defeating, not about showing that you're smarter, not about showing that your opponent is weaker or anything. It's all about getting to which evidence is the best and holds, and which survives. It's basically, in a way, it's testing. You take an idea, you take opposite positions on it, and then you test it. So there's that aspect. Naqḍ itself is just a tool in the toolbox of how this happens. It's not a particularly vicious move or anything like that. It's just a specific kind of move where you draw attention to an inconsistency. And it doesn't have to be the end of the game. As all of these theories of Naqḍ show us, there are rebuttals to somebody's Naqḍ. Mm-hmm. So if I come and I say, for example, what you just said, you said X is the case here, and then you said X causes Y in the thing we're arguing about, but over here in this other thing that you also believe, X causes not Y. Now, how can you have both in one universe where X is the same kind of cause? How can it be causing Y and the opposite of Y? This doesn't work. Well, that person can say, first of all, that second case that you just brought to show my inconsistency, that's not the same X, or it's not causing not Y. You got it wrong. So they can. It's not the end of the game when somebody catches you in Naqḍ. It's just that they perceive an inconsistency. They're bringing it to your attention now, and if you can't resolve it, then whatever premise that relied on that, you'll have to drop it. So even then, it might not be the end of the game. It could be the end of one of your dalils that was supporting a premise that was part of a dalil that supported another premise, or something like that. So Naqḍ as itself, there's nothing intrinsically bad or destructive about it. It sort of means destruction or tearing something down. But in nature, it's if used ethically, it is simply pointing out a contradiction, or pointing out that what you hold to leads to an untenable consequence of some kind. Contradiction, circularity, infinite regress, that sort of thing.
I have two more questions, but they are yes. According to your research, I mean, what was, or what is the juridical school that contributed the most in the development of the adab al-jadal al-munadara? I mean, the known schools are the Hanafite, the Shafi'ite, the Hanbalite, and the Malikite. So, but Yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, one of the things that delighted me the more and more I learned is to see how, it's coming from all schools, maybe not in the same amount, but you do have contributions from all over the place. And think about this, for example. I love this fact that Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi was in Baghdad, who traveled all the way from Andalusia, but Abu al-Walid al-Baji, and I don't know if it was obviously it wasn't the only reason, but in his travels in the East, he studied he's a Maliki, studying with a Shafi'i in Baghdad, along with another student of his was Ibn Aqil, Hanbali. These are all major figures. Shirazi himself had dialectical disputations with another great prominent Shafi'i of his day, Al-Juwaini. Al-Juwaini's student is Al-Ghazali. So there's definitely a lot of Shafi'is and Hanafis. The Hanafi works in the early time, you have to look in the usul text to find it. That's something that I would bring up to people that want to get into the study of dialectic, is that look in the usul al-fiqh books as well, especially, of course, in the chapters on qiyas.
Yeah.
Because this is, you'll often find things that are equivalent to entire treatises on jadal as parts of chapters, and nobody talks much about these. When we talk about jadal, we look at the books that are dedicated entirely to jadal, when in fact there's so much you can get out of the usul text. So I don't know. I guess in the end, maybe it is mostly, if you had to add up all the authors contributing to dialectical theory, maybe you would get more Shafis and Hanafis, especially after the Adab al-Beth, when the Adab al-Beth really took off in the Ottoman Empire. And I think maybe the majority of Adab al-Beth writers were Hanafis. But, even then there are those moments where, what do they call it? Confessional ambiguity in the time of the Mongols, for example, the Ilkhanate. I still don't know Shamsuddin Samarkandi. I don't know what madhab he was.
Yeah,
you can't tell. Sometimes he sounds like a Hanafi. Sometimes he sounds like a Shafi, and people have guessed that he was probably a Maturidi, but it's not sure either. He was, what he was? He was a muhaqqiq.
Yeah.
He was following the hujjah. He was engaging with everything argumentatively, and he was sort of supra madhab in a way. So I'm sorry I don't have a satisfying answer.
No, it's
contributed the most to dialectical theory in Islam, but everybody contributed, and of course I'm being very Sunni centric. Ithnashari scholars like Nasiruddin Tusi, most definitely. If I don't know if anything of their writing survives, we have what may be a Jadal or Adab al-Beth treatise by Al-Alam al-Hilli, who studied with Burhanuddin al-Nasafi in Baghdad. So I mean, everybody, it was a universal phenomena.
My last question is about the European reception of this Adab al-Jadal al-Munadara. That's the.
You mean today or in the past?
No, in the past. I mean,
in the past.
George Maqdisi, I mean, had some assumptions about this, and I ask your, to give us or to share with us your opinion or your view on this topic.
Well, I have to say, unfortunately, my opinion would be quite uneducated, because what I do know of the issue is, from what I read of George Maqdisi, the rise of the colleges and what's the other one, the rise of humanism. These are spectacular works filled with details, and he's a wonderful writer. I really enjoy, because he fills it with anecdotes about real disputations gone wrong. Shafi himself, by the way, might have died from an injury sustained after a Jadal session that went bad. The opponent got mad and hit him in the head. That's one possibility for how a Shafi came to his end. if I recall correctly. But to answer the question, the little bit that I've been exposed to medieval Latin scholastic argumentation is that it is a different animal. The resemblances are general in scope, the same way that when we look at juristic Jadal, like in the time of Shirazi or even later, it's similar to dialectic only in the broadest way, in its objectives, in its dialogical question and answer format. There are, probably there are some more specific different commonalities, but ultimately it's its own thing. And I think that was also true in medieval scholastic argumentation and dialectic. It was its own, it has its own authors, its own traditions, different schools, different. Again, I'm completely out of my league here. I don't know really the first thing about what was going on, but when I do see it in some articles coming up, it just doesn't look familiar. I don't think that Jadal and Adab al-Bath treatises were being translated into European languages the way that other sciences were. But you know what? I could be totally wrong, but that's my impression.
Yeah.
And it's certainly something that's worth looking into. I did find something from, I think it was the 18th century, where somebody who had been traveling in Istanbul reported about this thing called Adab al-Bath wal Munazara, that the women of the Sultan's palace or something along that line, they were reading this material and becoming proficient in debate for the purpose of, of education in private salons and that sort of thing. And this reference, I'll have to go look it up, but it's probably the oldest thing I could find that references Islamicate dialectics in the West.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a small, short question by our friend from Malaysia.
Hello again.
Yeah.
Okay. Naqḍ, I would say that Naqḍ is, we're just talking about a single dialectical move, a single kind of argument that you would use in a disputation. So Naqḍ, to suggest that the qawadih, oh yes, okay, sorry, I misread the question. We're talking about qawadih.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So Naqḍ is one of the qawadih al-illa. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. In usul al-fiqh, and if you look in the usul al-fiqh works under that chapter, what is the mufsid of the illa? What is the qadih of the illa? What invalidates the illa or undermines the illa? You will find almost certainly some kind of discussion about Naqḍ. Whether or not people agree with it is a different matter. Early Hanafis, for example, that did embrace takhsis al-illa, Naqḍ isn't really an issue, because as long as you can identify a mana or a shart that's been neglected, then you can have that cause without its hukum. But otherwise, it's accepted as a sign or a qadih, something that undermines the illah. Yes. So yes, thank you for drawing attention to that.
We come to the end of this lecture. Thank you so much, Edward, for this for your presentation and for answers. I mean, thank you for generosity.
Well, thank you so much for this very generous invitation, and I've enjoyed talking with you and answering some of these questions.
Yeah, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, have a nice time. Maybe see you next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.